Well, good afternoon, Cohort A. And, did you know that you yourself are part of an invasive species that we call humanity? Okay, and I'm actually not kidding. But anyway, take a look at this. This is our last lesson, guys. After this, there's no more online lessons. You'll be working on your own the next week, okay, for the next few days to put together your cheat sheet for Wednesday's test. Okay, so I'll see you on Monday, and we'll look into that. We'll do a little review material. I strongly recommend you take out your old tests or the old review material for each unit and just maybe go through that as review while you're making up your sheet that you're going to bring in with you. Okay, and then yeah, and that's it. You're preparing for that open book test, but just your test that you've already had or the reviews that you've already had for the test that we've done already will come in handy at this time. You don't want to have to go over absolutely everything, right? That's not how you prepare for a test like this. So, I'll give you some pointers on Monday, but you might want to get started doing that after today and you finish off ecology. But let's take a look at this, invasive species. Okay, here you see an invasive species of plant. Okay, I think this one is a Japanese plant that has invaded some of our forests, and what's happening is you're getting a monoculture growing on the floor of the forest that's killing off all the native species like ferns and everything else that you might normally find on the forest floor. Okay, so an invasive species comes from some other place, usually another continent, and it has been brought here either on purpose and been introduced. We call those introduced species, or it has been it hitched a ride, and someone unwittingly brought that over. Say, for example, some spores or some seeds or whatever, airborne seeds made their way onto the deck of an aircraft or something like that. It flies over and then gets cleaned out and blows out and takes root somewhere. Okay, and that's an invasive species. Now, to be invasive, there's lots of introduced species that are not invasive. In other words, they don't outcompete our local organisms. They don't do very well, but sometimes we get extremely aggressive species that are very invasive, and when you remove them from their natural environment where they don't have as many controls, okay, the population can explode and it can have a very negative effect on the local ecology of wherever they're introduced. Okay, so look, let's just briefly go through this. I don't want to spend a lot of time. It's pretty obvious what this is, an invasive species. So native species are those that normally live and thrive in a particular community. Okay? So those are native species. They occupy specific habitats, okay, and have specific roles or niches, okay, in their native environment. They have natural predators, okay, natural predators that help to keep their populations in check, okay, and this is actually very important, okay, if you are a native species. So you sort of develop a natural equilibrium with your environment, and to have the biodiversity that we have in a forest, let's say, everything's kind of keeping everything else in check so that no one species can dominate. Now, a non-native species, so this idea here of a non-native species is a species living outside its native distributional range. Okay? So in other words, it's not where it belongs, basically. Okay? And it has arrived there by human activity is usually the deal, and it's either deliberate, so we introduce them, or accidental. Okay? Non-native species are not necessarily invasive. Not necessarily invasive, okay? So that is, it depends on whether or not they can take over. We call it, if they take over, in other words, if they reproduce out of control, then we consider them invasive. Okay, so a rose here was introduced for use as an ornamental plant, okay, to control erosion and to use as living fences for livestock. This rose is non-invasive. Okay, so this is an introduced species, non-invasive. Zebra mussels, on the other hand, okay, were accidentally introduced in the ballast water of ships, okay, probably brought over, we think, from the Caspian Sea. Okay, and they were brought to North America and deposited in the Great Lakes. They can't survive in seawater, so they were in the ballast water of these ships. Okay, and they are now found in the Great Lakes, and these are invasive. Okay, in other words, they have completely changed the ecology of the Great Lakes, whereas these plants, these ones here in particular, are non-invasive. Okay, so what is a non-native species? So like that's what we already just talked about that. They come from elsewhere, from another community somewhere else. Okay, and that's it. Okay, and they can be invasive. The emerald ash borer is, whoops, the emerald ash borer, we have lots of those around here. So if you look at trees with leaves, it's hard to tell now that the fall is here, trees are losing their leaves. But in the springtime, if you look around spring and summer, you will see stands of dead trees, okay, all over the place in Ottawa. A high percent, disproportionately high percentage of those dead trees are ash trees. And it's these guys here, these emerald ash borers, that are responsible for killing off the ash trees. You might notice the bark, just underneath the bark of the tree that's dying or dead, you'll see these little tracks underneath the trees. That's their larvae that are destroying one of the crucial layers underneath the bark of the tree, and then the tree dies as a result. And basically, because of this invasive species, our ash tree population is going to be completely decimated. And there's not much we can do about it, unfortunately. Okay, so that species is considered invasive for that reason. This Japanese stiltgrass, okay, becomes established on recently disturbed areas and outcompetes native plants, so we consider it invasive, and that reduces the biodiversity. We get a monoculture, we get mostly that plant. Okay. All right, so common characteristics of invasive species. They have to thrive, so they have to have very few predators in their new environment. Okay, they have low competition, so they don't have too many competitors in their new environment. They don't have too many parasites or diseases to control their population. Okay, like say the Caspian Sea might be nutrient poor, and so zebra mussels don't really reproduce out of control there, but then introduced into the Great Lakes, which are nutrient rich, and they reproduce out of control. Okay. And so that's one of the things. They have to have high reproductive potential, high reproductive rates, so they reproduce really easily and quickly. Okay, they are long-lived. Okay, they tend to be generalists, which means they can feed on a variety of different nutrients that are available. Okay, and they are sometimes pioneer species. They don't have to be pioneer species, but these are general characteristics. So in other words, they can just move into an area with very little, just rock to start with, and they can survive just on that. Zebra mussels just need to cling, they just need water, and they can cling to the side of a rock or the side of a dock or something like that, and they just filter out the nutrients straight out of the water. Okay. All right, invasive plants are a little bit different. They tend to flower early. They produce an abundant amount of seed to reproduce. They disperse the seed widely. Okay. They rapidly grow to outcompete the native plants. They reproduce asexually, which means they don't need other similar plants in order to reproduce. And they compete very strongly for competitors with soil, say, competing for water with other plants and everything. They will outcompete the other plants and choke them off, okay, of their nutrient supply. Okay, Japanese stiltgrass is a great example of an invasive species. Here you can see in the picture at the bottom. Okay, my pen is slow motion again today. I've got to reset the computer. But anyway, yeah, you can see how that plant has taken over the forest floor. And now we have a monoculture on the forest floor. So there it's further south. You'll see examples of that plant. Garlic mustard does the same thing. Here we can see it's taken over in this area here. You might have seen these plants. I think we get them up here. Okay, in this area. And what they do is they displace the native species. Okay, and that is a problem. Okay, so let's just move on here. I don't need to. You can read some of this on your own. Okay, if you want, a more in-depth discussion on it. Okay, so some invasive species that kill other species, like for example, the emerald ash borer, is being completely decimated by the ash trees are being completely decimated. by this insect. Okay, so they're actually killing all the trees. There are various other species. The Dutch elm disease has killed off most of the elm trees in our area. We still have elm trees, but they don't live very long because that thing is still around. So they can grow to a certain stage of development, and then what happens is, the disease will infect them, and then the tree will die. All right, so indirect impacts. Let's just move on. I think you get the idea what an what an invasive species can do. Starlings. It's estimated that starlings, because of their the disease that they spread to wildlife and livestock and humans, plus damage to agricultural crops. Okay, and these were introduced species. They were not introduced by accident, but on purpose, because somebody thought it was a good idea to introduce these birds to North America because they happened to be in some lines of Shakespeare's poetry. Okay, and they said, hey, why don't we have examples of these birds? So they brought them over from Europe, so European starlings. Damage to crops is estimated at 800 million per year. Okay, so invasive species can be extremely expensive. Now, what can we do? Obviously, let's try not to introduce invasive species. This is one of the things why we have rules about transporting firewood from one area of, say, Ontario to another area of Ontario. When you transport that firewood, it could contain some, emerald ash borer or other larva stage of other insects, or the insects themselves. And now you're introducing them, spreading them by introducing them to another area by carrying the dead wood from one area to another area. Okay. You can help remove native species too, and do a good thing for your environment as you do that. If you own exotic pets, do not introduce them to the wild by letting them loose. Okay, which you probably don't do, but like plants. Okay, like tropical plants that are not native to Canada. Okay, they don't usually do very well. They're not usually invasive, but you can have plants that are invasive, as we've seen. Okay, aquarium fish are not native to this area. They can be invasive. Like goldfish are a type of carp. Okay, and Asian carp is a particularly invasive fish that's in our Great Lakes right now. Okay. Yeah, so that's it for invasive species. I hope you sort of get it there. It's not too much to it. Let's now talk about pesticides. And we're going to finish our ecology unit with the pesticide thing. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back to the beginning. Pests and pesticide. First of all, in order to be considered a pest, okay, all kidding aside, okay, we say students are pests sometimes. Well, you get it, right? Okay, but yeah, in order to be considered truly a pest in the ecological sense of the term, is you have to be harmful in some way. Okay, so insects can be considered pests because they're a type of parasite. Okay, and sometimes we want to control. In fact, one of the more tragic examples of pesticide use that has caused a lot of damage was one that we were trying to use to control the population of mosquitoes. Okay, now sometimes we have good motivation to do it. For example, let's say you live in an area where there's lots of mosquitoes that carry malaria. Well, maybe it's not so bad of a trade-off to want to kill off those mosquitoes, and weighing the pros and cons of using a pesticide to do that. And in fact, in the past, we have used pesticides to try to do this, and sometimes with devastating results because they weren't sufficiently tested. Okay, or at least we didn't know that they had long-term effects. Okay, so look, a pesticide is any substance or mixture used to prevent, destroy, or repel, or mitigate any pest. Okay? Now, a pest could be a weed that you don't want in your crops, and so you can spray it with herbicide. Okay, and herbicide will destroy certain types of weeds. Okay? What is a pest? Organisms that occur where and when they are not wanted. Okay? And they could be like, small insects. They could be a fungus. They could be a nematode. They could be other types of plants, so we use herbicides for those, and here we use insecticides. Okay, and that's it. And of course, the 9 STEAMicide, okay, for students in 9 STEAM class. Anyway, I'm just kidding. We love you all. Of course we do. Of course we do, okay? Here's the thing.
If Sajin Sharikmar is in the building, could he come to the main office? Sajin Sharikmar, could you come to the main office? Thank you.
All right, pardon that interruption. That's kind of funny on my recording. I think that's the first time that's happened. But rat poison. Okay, rat poison is an example of a pesticide if you consider the rats pests. Black light trap for insects. Okay, you might have something like that. The ultraviolet light will attract the insects, and then you trap them and kill them in the trap. Chlorine in your pool kills bacteria and algae and other insects and stuff that might make a life for themselves inside your pool. Pheromones are used to attract insects and sometimes kill them. Okay, there are various pros and cons. Let's talk about the pros for a minute. Okay, obviously, if you are growing a crop and you're a farmer, you might use various herbicides and pesticides to maximize your crop yield. That makes sense. If you use a pesticide to kill mosquitoes and the mosquitoes carry malaria, well, you know what? Like that, malaria is a very deadly disease. And if you want to use it to control that particular insect, that is a pro of pesticides. You can actually get successfully controlling insect populations with these pesticides. Okay, and controlling the rat population and so on. It does actually work. So that's why we use them. The cons are obvious too. Okay, so let's talk about that. Pros is you preserve crops, right? Improve crop yield, prevents disease if the pests are carrying disease. Here's the cons though, and the cons are pretty serious. They might kill other organisms. So a broad spectrum pesticide will kill organisms that are not eating your crops. Okay, they will just, they're broad spectrum, so they're not targeted to one particular pest, and they'll kill a whole bunch of different insects. Okay, superbugs. This is a big one. Superbugs are insects. I'm using insects as my example, but pests can become resistant to your pesticide through the process of microevolution. Okay, where the plants or animals, the pests reproduce, and their offspring, the ones that survive to reproduce, might have a higher tolerance for your pesticide that you're using, and that's how they survived. And now the entire population has this higher tolerance because they've passed that characteristic onto their offspring, and you've killed off the ones that had a low tolerance. So the only ones that are left are highly tolerant of your pesticide. Now your pesticide doesn't work anymore. Okay? And that new population is a superbug, and the superbugs now are resistant to your pesticides, and we can't kill them so easily. Okay? We can have forever chemicals they're called, that persist for long periods of time in the environment, and that can be toxic. And also the pesticides can be toxic to us. It always drove me crazy when neighbors would spray their lawns with pesticide to keep the weeds down. Okay, and the stuff is toxic to us and toxic to the kids, and just pull the weeds. It's probably a better idea compared to spreading pesticide all over the place. All right, so this is pretty obvious. This is how resistance gets developed. Let's say the red bugs are resistant to your pesticide. The first time you apply your pesticide, you will kill several of the blue bugs. Okay, so here's the ideal here. You apply your pesticide, the red one survives, and a couple of blue ones that just maybe the pesticide missed them. Now reproduction happens, and we get more red ones, okay, and fewer blue ones that we originally had. And then we apply the pesticide a second time, and now we get mostly red ones, and we can't kill the red ones with your pesticide. So now we've developed a superbug, the red one, that is got a large population that we cannot control. Now there's a little chart that explains the problem of using pesticide. I'll get you to read that on your own. Okay, so please read this on your own. Okay, in the notes. Persistence is fat-soluble ones. Okay, so here's the deal. Fat-soluble, I'm sorry if you don't see what I'm doing there. Fat-soluble can persist in the tissue of animals. So, for example, if you eat food that is water-soluble, your body will tend to excrete anything that's water-soluble over time. However, that means you get it out of your system. However, if the food that you're eating has fat-soluble stuff, fat-soluble material will get stored in the fatty tissue of your body, okay? And all, insects and mammals and stuff like that have fat tissue where they can store this stuff. And fat-soluble ones will persist. They will get stored, okay, in the fat, okay, inside your cells, okay? So that's the problem with fat-soluble pesticides. Okay, now this brings us up to our last topic here, biomagnification or bioaccumulation. Here's the deal, okay? Let's say you have the ocean or water or whatever has pesticide in it, and it accumulates on the leaves of these plants, okay? So here you are, the producers. At the bottom of this picture here, these producers here, okay, and they have pesticide on them. Now, if you spray the lawn with like some chemical, at home, if you want a terrestrial ecosystem, then that's it, okay? Now, some herbivore comes along, the primary consumer, so this fish here, in this case, eats the plant. But herbivores eat a lot of plants. So if the concentration in the plants of the pesticide might be quite low, but if it's a fat-soluble pesticide, then as the herbivore eats more and more plants, it gets stored in their fatty tissue, and the concentration, so let's say the herbivore eats 100 plants. Well, one plant has a low concentration of pesticide. So here, you can see this number here. Sorry, the color is not great. You can see this number here, 4.04 parts per million. So that's a very low concentration of pesticide on the individual plant. But the problem is that the herbivore doesn't just eat one individual plant, it eats many individual plants. And what's happening is the pesticide, which is fat soluble, its body acts like kind of a filter, storing all the pesticide inside that body of that herbivore. So now this herbivore has a much higher concentration of the pesticide in its fat tissue. That one herbivore has the equivalent of 10 plants worth, or in this case, like, 10, a little bit less than 10, like 5 plants worth of pesticide stored in its tissue. Okay, let's say between 5 and 6 plants worth. Okay, now what happens is that the next level of predator will have to eat several of the prey fish. So this secondary consumer fish here will eat several of the prey organisms. Well, as they do that, they too will store the pesticide in their fatty tissue. And because they're going to eat like 10 of these prey animals in order to survive, the concentration increases again by a factor of 10. Okay, so now this guy has 10 times more pesticide concentrated in his body, okay, compared to the fish on the next lower level of the food chain. Okay, then what happens is by the time you get to the hawk here at the top, or the osprey, whatever's eating that fish, okay, here this organism at the top, okay, that guy there, he's going to eat 10 of the secondary consumers, and he's going to store all that pesticide in his fatty tissue, and again, you'll get a 10-fold increase, okay, in the concentration of pesticide. It's not quite 10 times, but let's say it's 6 to 7 times more concentrated in this particular example. And so what's happening is you get an increase in the concentration as you move up the food chain. Okay, this pesticide is increasing in concentration, and it's the most concentrated in the top level predators at the top of the food chain. Okay, now several species of predatory birds have declined precipitously thanks to the use of a particular pesticide we call DDT. So I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. Anyway, there's been some link, I was going to mention this too, there's been some link to pesticides and attention deficit disorder. Some of these pesticides are neurotoxins. In other words, they work on the nervous system of the insects you're trying to kill, but they also work on your nervous system if you were to take them in to your system by eating or drinking them. Okay? And so, yeah, if they're toxic to insects, very likely they're toxic to us also. Okay, now, we're going to talk about some of these things. I wanted to talk about DDT in particular. So on the test next week, let's just spend a few minutes talking about DDT. So DDT stands for dichlor diphenyl trichloroethane. Okay, you know what ethane is. Anyway, they've got like some chlorine on there, a phenyl group on there, and some chlorine, okay, all stuck together in this molecule, and that's DDT. Now DDT turns out to be particularly toxic to insects, okay, in particular. And so somebody had this idea that, hey, let's spray the insect population. Let's spray this chemical broadly all over the place in your cities, in your towns. They even painted like their house, okay, the doors and entry points around their house, doors and windows, with DDT. Okay, like they sprayed it on kids that are playing in the playground. They went to Africa and sprayed it on people there. You know, and the scientists were shown eating it just to show that it was safe. Okay, its effect on humans is relatively moderate. Okay, it's a known carcinogen, but you know, it's kind of like smoking. Like, you know, you could smoke cigarettes. Not everyone who does that gets cancer. Okay, so you have increased your likelihood of getting cancer, and you know, and it could affect your health in very serious ways. The quality of life, it has a very likely impact on your quality of life, a negative impact. But you know, it might not kill you. But the malaria, on the other hand, is extremely deadly. So you spray yourself with DDT. We do this all the time with bug spray that we use if we're going camping or something like that. That is toxic to us too. But we're willing to accept the risks, the small risk of using that pesticide to keep the mosquitoes off of us, instead of getting, you know, constantly bitten by these pests, right? All right, so anyway, they broadly spread around this DDT. It turns out to be not a great idea, okay? DDT, one they figured out is this woman who figured out, she wrote The Silent Spring, okay? And she was at first criticized. Rachel Carson is her name. There you go. I couldn't remember the name in class today. I was going through this quickly. Rachel Carson, this person right here, Rachel Carson, she figured out how the DDT was actually damaging the food chain, okay, the food webs, and being passed along and biomagnified in the food webs because of fat-soluble toxin. Here you can see here this kid being sprayed, okay, with DDT. Everyone's all smiles, right? Hey, let's take care of that hair lice or whatever the kid has. We'll spray them with DDT. And it was a war on insects. I mean, that's how they thought of it. This chemical is extremely persistent. So it was banned in 1972, okay? But you will still find DDT in your bodies today, like in most of us. And the reason why is because it's extremely persistent, okay? And even though they banned it 40 years ago, it still persists in the environment today in lower and lower concentrations over time. Eventually it'll disappear. But yeah, that's it. Eagles were almost wiped out in the United States because of the broad use of DDT, okay? And it's because it gets biomagnified in the food chain. So DDT is almost caused a complete collapse of some of the food chains that we have. And so they banned it in 1972. Okay, you really want to see them like this. I put some links to YouTube videos down here. You see them spraying it on children. You'll see them like spraying it all over the cities and towns. If you just type in DDT being sprayed, there's lots of videos. There are TV commercials that are made to promote it. It was actually invented in wartime to help soldiers who were plodding through the jungles, right, deal with the insect problem that they had there. Okay. I'm not sure why this slide is here. Okay. So there are some alternatives, okay, that we can use. We can use natural controls and so on, but I don't want to talk too much about that. Yeah, we can release predatory organisms. That's kind of a cool way of dealing with insects. Like there are birds and stuff like that, types of birds that do feed exclusively on mosquitoes, for example. If we had lots of those around, we would have a much smaller mosquito problem. So, you know, the way you manage your crops, like if you have companion plants that keep away the pests, okay, from your plants that you're trying to grow, that's better than spraying them with toxic chemicals. All right, that's it for today. Okay, as far as the homework is concerned, we're done this unit. So if you could please, the only homework you have to do that's left here, okay, this is the only homework that you have to do, is this and this. Okay, I'm going to highlight it in yellow, and that one, and that one. And then that's it for the homework. Am I checking homework? Yes, I haven't checked it for a while, but I will check all the homework, whatever's left in chemistry, whatever's left in electricity. I did mark all the space homework, but whatever's left, so please make sure it's all there in OneNote. And then I will just a completion mark, but just make sure it's there and it's done. Like I'll pick certain questions to look through to make sure you've done it, and give you a mark. It's an easy mark. Okay, and then you want to start working on your cheat sheet for the RST next week, which will be a test that covers topics from all the different units. Not an exam, okay? It's not going to be as long as an exam, and an exam you wouldn't get a cheat sheet. So, you know, you should be good with it. You know, you have a little reference card with you when you're writing the test, so that should help. Okay, guys, so that's welcome to the end of the unit and the end of the course. Like that's all the material that we're going to cover in ecology, and then that's it for science in this block. We're together for less than a week now, so I will see you on Monday and Wednesday next week, and then that's it. I won't see you until after Christmas after that, like in February. We'll get together again. How fortunate you are that we're going to get together again. Okay, so that's it for now, and I will see you on Monday. If you have any questions, as usual, just ask me on Slack. Okay. If you don't have a test, I can like post a copy of the test that I gave you. You know, whatever. I should have given back all the tests now. There's some here that people haven't collected for whatever reason, so you can collect those on Monday, and you'll get Monday's class to review and make your cheat sheet. Okay, and then of course Tuesday you're on your own, and then on Wednesday you'll write the test, and then Thursday you have off. Okay, like literally. So that's it for the rest of the course, guys, and we'll reconvene on Monday then. All right, have a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon.